Fletcher Tink has served as pastor, professor, and director of 4 urban training institutes and authored numerous books. He has lived in 7 nations, taught formally in 60 nations, preached in many others, and traveled throughout 124 different countries. One of Fletcher's most notable organizations he was involved in was the Brazil Institute for Metro Ministries. He was the director of the program in Kansas City. He is currently a permanent resident in the Philippines, where he heads up the PhD program in Transformational Development at Asia Pacific Nazarene Theological Seminary, appointed by the Consortium of Asia Graduate School of Theology. His most recent seminar was on Culture, Context, and Worldview, a collaboration with Filipina anthropologist Dr. Melba Bakke. Recently, Dr. Tink has been involved in a lot of support effort towards people who have been affected by COVID, as well as people who were affected by the volcanic eruption at the banks of the Taal Lake in the Philippines. His most recent book, Divine Encounters, is a narrative of 108 stories that follow his philosophy that every meeting is a divine encounter, and every meeting is an exchange of gifts. I had the great pleasure of speaking with Dr. Tink, and here is how it went. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Mission Enlightenment Project. Today we'll be interviewing Dr. Fletcher Tink, who, as you guys saw in the introduction segment, has a very long and illustrious life filled with God-led work, not only in the field of missionary work, but also just in the field of his day-to-day walk. And we're going to be learning a lot more about that as we continue. But first, Fletcher, I just wanted to ask, is there anything, any highlight in your illustrious career you want to share with our audience before we proceed?
Well, Tyler, it's a pleasure to walk through with you some of the aspects of my life. Let me turn it around. Highlights are usually in relationship to lowlights. If you've gone down low and then something happens, it's amazing how that becomes a very important moment in your life. I was serving as a missionary in Bolivia. And during that period of time, my wife was expecting a baby, a second child. We did not realize it, but it was a case of placenta previa, where the condition was not diagnosed in a very small hospital, Catholic hospital in Cochabamba, Bolivia. And at that point, when we took her in for what we thought was going to be a normal birth process, it turns out that the nurse punctured the placenta, started hemorrhaging, and my wife almost died. The baby a day later did die. It was the watershed of my life. I had prepared to be a missionary. Everything was looking good. We were very happy with the assignment. But my wife had a complete emotional break, with the result that our family fell apart. And I went through a period of time where I didn't know who God was. I wasn't sure I wanted to live. And then for the 6-year-old daughter that we had, the story might have been quite different. But on the day of the divorce, a very strange thing happened. I received a call asking me to serve as the senior pastor of the International Interdenominational English-speaking Congregation of FletchT. Who would think that on the day of a divorce, you'd be given an opportunity like this? So I'd lost my wife, I'd lost my son, and now I found myself in a totally different situation. In the course of my pastorate there, I was confronted with a moment. There was somebody in my life who had offended me at the deepest level. Do I forgive him? Do I retain that bitterness? I ended up going to his home, and I said, in some sense, I absolve. You're going to have to deal with God, but I'm not going to allow our relationship to destroy who I am as a person. That was the watershed moment of my moral life. Because if I had not taken that particular stand, I think my story would be very different. I saw God reconstruct me. And where I am now, I'm in the Philippines. I've lived a life. God has blessed me. I have 14 grandchildren. I've got 7 children. 3 of them are Filipinos. 4 of them are American. I have African grandchildren. I've got Mexican grandchildren through adoption. God has blessed my life. And I'm now at the ripe old age of 77, where I'm fully engaged in mission work, heading up a PhD program at Asia Pacific Management Theological Seminary. I look back. If I had allowed the bitterness to continue, I think that would have been the end of my influence, the end of my purposes in life. But on that day, when I went down and offered forgiveness, ironically, the fellow never did change, and he died a very premature death. Good story, though. But I think we have moments in our lives, kairos moments, where God steps in, and you've got a choice to make. And that choice either will help you to flower your life or diminish your life. And in my case, I think I did the right thing. I allowed him to flower my life. So I look back. That was 40 years ago. That's a long time ago. That still stands out as probably the road less traveled. And
Right.
I thank you for that opportunity.
Yeah, I can only imagine how many lives have been changed thanks to that one decision. How God took you on a path that has changed maybe tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives, because you are a leader of leaders. The work you do now is really impacting a very large number of people, whether it be directly or indirectly. So that was, as you mentioned, over 40 years ago. Let's talk about the moments after that before we really get into what's going on in your current mission. What are some major standout moments for you in your path that you just want to talk about? Not anything you want, but specific to the impact you feel that God has used you to make.
Well, let me go back to my calling. I grew up in a pastor's home. I was born in Canada, and then my parents took me to Scotland, then to London, and back to Canada. I'm an urban person. I've lived in major cities all of my life, lived in 6 capital cities. And so that has nurtured in me a passion for urban ministry. But throughout college, I felt like I needed to major in areas that were somewhat different from theology, from missions. And so I studied, first of all, mathematics, which came to me, and then psychology. I love those fields because I knew that finally and ultimately I would probably go to seminary and focus upon the biblical studies. Well, it turns out that when I came up to graduation, I found myself, obviously as a single guy, no doors were open for single people within my own church connection, though I was missionaries. I had kind of an abstract idea, not so much of being a missionary, but of being a servant of Jesus Christ in a pastoral role. My parents were very traditional. They felt very strongly that I ought to graduate and then go on to seminary and then do my 2 to 4 years of pastoral responsibility. And then if I wanted to be a missionary, I could be assigned through my denomination. Well, it didn't happen that way. When I came up to graduation, it turns out that I hosted an African-American fellow representing the Peace Corps in my dorm room. He taught me about the Peace Corps. And so later I applied to the Peace Corps. Peace Corps, of course, was a project from John Kennedy, the idealist, who felt very strongly that young people could take their abilities, take their talents, take their passions out into the world, take their idealism into the world, and utilize that in living simply within communities around the world for transformative purposes. Well, I applied, but I did not apply enthusiastically. I didn't give a lot of information. And the result was that they assigned me, and it met 3 of the requirements that I had in my head put out there as physics. Number 1, that I'd learn a language that would be very useful for later missionary service. That I'd serve in a country where I could connect with my own denomination. That I would have an assignment that would be free enough for me to be a witness. And so when I came back, I was assigned to Brazil. And one of the assignments was working with a Christian organization in São Paulo, or working with the social service agency in Brasilia. And yes, I understood that there was some churches newly minted in the part of Brazil that I was to serve. I ended up serving as a social worker. I don't think I could have had a more intense, eye-opening experience from age 22 to 25, because I was a social worker at the Federal District Penitentiary in Brasilia. I was the only social worker. They never had a social work program prior to my coming there. So everything was new, everything was novel. And so the result was that I cut my teeth living with the people, learning the Portuguese language, living in a $300 shack right next to the prison, and appreciating and respecting the kinds of people, even inside the prison, and the prison guards that I was working with. I was an agent outside of the prison to create public relations, and so I had to work with many churches and many organizations to try to pull in the resources for that prison. Let me drop back a little bit. 2 years earlier, I was traveling with a group of young people in Guatemala. And in Coban, Guatemala, we were having a citywide crusade. We were 7 young Americans. I was the youngest. I was the only teenager in the group. We were all men. And yet I felt a discomfort in that world of Americans. One night after the service, I was standing around and there was 100 young Pekchi Indians, and they were chanting out the Spanish numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. In that moment, I suddenly had that aha moment, revelation. These are the kinds of people that I'm called to. This is my purpose. Not being called to sophisticated American society, not being called to normative, large churches. I suppose I could have gone that direction. I want to live at the level with the people who are aching because they have known nothing or very little about what the sense of the gospel is. A third illustration. This also came out of my college days. I was a janitor on the campus. I walked into one of the offices that I had. It was the office of Anne Gulick, French professor. I'd heard she'd been a missionary, and she was kind of strange. She actually would hear God speaking to her audibly. In those conversations, she seemed to have an intimacy with God that I knew very little about. So after cleaning her office, I sat down with her and asked for her story. And she surprised me. She said when she was a little child, she was called to be a missionary to Japan. She spent the next 20 years preparing for that particular calling. She studied the Japanese language. She met all of her academic credentials. She got the support of people who were going to pay for her ministry in Japan. She nailed down an organization that would take her there. She knew that God was going to send her to Japan. And so the day came in which she flew to Japan. 6 months later, because of medical conditions, emotional conditions, relational conditions, she was a basket case. She got on that plane. They told her she could no longer serve as a missionary. She got on the plane, and as she was flying back, she was very angry with God. God, you called me to Japan, and all I am an embarrassment. This is a waste of money. This is a failure on your part. And she argued with God, and God planned that. He wouldn't talk to her. By the time she got back to the States, she finally heard, just before landing in San Francisco, God audibly speak to her. And I did not call you to Japan. What? You say you didn't call me to Japan? I was convinced for 20 years that you'd called me to Japan. Why had you so deceived me? And then the response was, no, and I have only one call. It's to myself. And I have the right to assign you to Japan for as long as I want you in Japan. I sent you there for 6 months. I'm pulling you back. But we're not primarily called to a place. We're not primarily called to a job description. We're called to Him as front and central. And I have been working with so many seminary students who have this calling and that calling and that calling. And what bothers me many times is they've never discovered what the calling is into the very presence of who God is in their lives. And that's what I keep in front of me. The primary calling is not to be a missionary. The primary calling is to move as close to God as I can and let Him deal with me in 1,000 different ways. And He has. I've been a pastor, I've been an associate pastor, I've headed up all kinds of training institutions. I've taught all over the world. I found myself doing all kinds of tasks. But the primary calling is to God Himself. And once that is secure, then He can assign me here and there and so forth. I'm not primarily called to be a district superintendent in my denomination. I'm not primarily called to be pastor of a mega church. I'm called to be in the presence of Jesus Christ. And in my strange life, going through that divorce, frankly, freed me from normal expectations. I began to realize that my missionary work would have to be a missionary work of working with the broken pieces of my own life, working as an entrepreneur. And God has allowed me to create and to share and to adapt to all kinds of situations that I feel like He's allowed me to do. But the priority is to find myself in Him. So that's a little bit of my story. This is the road less traveled. Been lots of zigs and zags in the road along the way. Some things have been successful, other things only time and eternity will determine their value. But it has been quite a life. And when people ask me where I am, life is full and fulfilling. And what I see is wherever I turn, God has mission for me. And so it's not important where the money comes from. It's not important what kinds of adulation or acceptance I find in people around me. For instance, today, I walked down the street. I live 3 hours south of Manila. I live in a little community, which is a subdivision recently built. Still in the process of building. There'll be 700 homes. Every time that there's a celebration, I show up. The fireworks go off, the tent goes up, the liquor is pulled out. I intentionally go wandering into the party. They welcome me. And I sit down, I talk with them, I drink my Coca-Cola. We have great conversations. And then I said, would you want me to pray a prayer of blessing? By the way, I've taught in some very strange places. I've taught in China. I've taught in Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, some of the most difficult places in the world. And when I go there, my students are Muslims. My students are Hindus, Baha'i, Roman Catholic, Christian, Pentecostal. I've got all kinds of people that have sat through my seminars. And I tell them this, I'm not here to judge you. As Abraham was called to be a blessing to the nations, I am called to be a blessing to you. And that's why I'm here. The imams in Pakistan would ask me, why did you come to Pakistan? I'd share a little story with them. I'd say, you know, as I was leaving the country, in the airport, there was an amazing large picture made up of stones and pieces of mirror and all kinds of beads that marked out the dimensions of the shape of the nation of Pakistan. I said to myself, you know, I want to take this back and give this to my wife. So I had them pack it up, and they assured me that it was in very good condition. I put it in my suitcase. I arrived back in the United States. I opened the suitcase. I started to unpack this, thinking that this would be a remarkable gift to give to my wife. As I unpacked it, the beads, the mirrors, the whole thing fell out to pieces. I was really bothered by this. This was my major expense. I really wanted something to give to her, and all I had was something in shambles, which, by the way, I think is kind of the story of my life. You know, we want to put things together like this, and when we finally offer it back to God in terms of human value, it's all kind of broken and it's all kind of pieces falling. But God receives it. So anyway, the end of the story was I was ready to throw it away. And then something strange happened. Fletcher, why don't you keep it? And why don't you try to glue it piece by piece back together? Now I've never done that. I've never had time to do it. But when I'm talking to the imams in Pakistan, I say, why am I here? By the way, Pakistan, is it broken? They all nod their head, yes. Is it falling apart? Yes. And by the way, that's not just Pakistan, it's every country in the world. I said, you know, what's my calling? My calling is to be a little piece of glue. You know, that at some point and in some fashion, I can try to put the picture back together again, or at least a piece of the picture back together. Lord, help me to be just a little piece of glue. a blessing to the nations. And my Imam friends, they nod their heads. And they appreciate that because they realize I'm not come to judge their religion, not come to lay down my observations about the dysfunction of their nation. I'm there as a witness of Jesus Christ, the good news. And everywhere I go, I find that there is this girth, this heaviness, where people are live in this parallel world of sin. And they feel the pressures, and they feel the hostilities, and they feel the loneliness of it all. My mission is to be a little piece of the group. My mission is to bless the nations. And so that's a little bit of where I'm coming from. My mission is to be a little piece of the group. My mission is to bless the nations. And so that's a little bit of where I'm coming from.
That's beautiful. And it makes perfect sense that that's been your mission because of how much you've achieved. I think too often people do get kind of lost in their ways because they're so stuck on trying to follow the paths laid out by men versus trying to follow the divine their divine calling, or which can change it all the time, or a path that has never been taken before. So my question to you then is, how can we help people who are obedient to God discern like the difference of that path that they think they should take based off of what churches are presenting or based off of what other missionaries are doing versus a divine calling or a divine path that they might be missing? So how do we help people discern that difference?
Well, again, I think you come to moments in your life where you make some choices. I wrote a manuscript. My name's not on it. It was published. It's somewhere out there, probably in Amazon. I wrote it under commission for somebody else. But it's looking at this super ball, the bounce back. And I did a study of all the characters in the Bible that bounced back. They went through some dark days. And this is true, by the way, of many of the greatest Christian leaders, people like the Reformers, people like John Wesley, who said at one point, "I'm not now nor ever have been a Christian." At a point of depression within his own life. But the capacity of the gospel allows us to bounce back. God's grace is sufficient. And we go through the dark night of the soul. And I think anybody who's worth their salt has gone through the dark night of the soul. And they come out from the far end of it far better, far deeper than when they went in. My verse of scripture that really kind of defines me comes from Isaiah chapter 43, verse 10. And it comes out of the experience of conversations that I had with Elizabeth Elliot. Elizabeth Elliot was the missionary, Betty Elliot, who was married to Jim Elliot, who was one of the 5 missionaries who flew into Ecuador and was attacked on the initial meeting by what they then called the Auca Indians. The proper name is the Waorani Indians. And they were killed. Back in the 1950s, this made the cover of Time magazine. But Betty Elliot later returned with her child, her 4, 5, 6-year-old child and lived with that tribe. The tribe only was 60 people, had only 5 men to the tribe because their internal discipline was such that if anybody violated their moral norms, they were eliminated. She lived with the murderers of her own husband and was a witness. And as she tried to witness to them, she barely knew their language. She tried to describe the stars in the sky and then the satellite that moved across the sky, and talked about a big fire that shoots up something called rockets into the sky. And then she talked about how God was up there and then he sent his son down to earth. These people were incredulous. They'd hear these stories and they'd just say, yes, yes, yes. How does this form Christianity within their own mindset? Because this is a world so far different than anything they had ever experienced. And so I asked her, I wrote her, Franconia Notch, New Hampshire, Betty Elliott. And she wrote me a letter back, said that her theme verse came from Isaiah chapter 43, verse 10. You are my witnesses and my people, whom I have chosen, that you may know and believe that I am He. That turned my sense of mission upside down. I thought that the purpose of me being called to be a missionary was to be a witness. Now, that word witness has a lot of depth to it. Witness also is, in Greek, the same word as martyr. A martyr is somebody who surrenders the most important things of their life back to God. It can be even their own lives. But their values, their politics, their prejudices, their affinities, their securities, all of this is contained, I think, in the word witness. You are my witnesses. I surrender these things to you, that you may know and believe that I am He. I thought it was that they should know. But what I've discovered in my life is, as I have put myself on the edge of risk and danger and insecurity for the calling of what God has given for me in that moment, as I moved out of my comfort zone and I found myself in a world where I don't have controls, that God begins to reveal himself at deeper and deeper levels of my own life. And I think part of the problem in America now is there's no risk-taking in being Christian. It's very socially acceptable to be Christian. What we call persecution in America is in no way similar to the persecution that I've seen in other parts of the world. What we call persecution in America means a discomfort, but it's a discomfort over my priorities. It's not a discomfort over the fact that I have surrendered my comfort so that others may hear the witness. And so in that process, God himself begins to reveal himself at deeper and deeper and deeper levels. I'm living in bonus years. Here in the Philippines, the average life expectancy is 66. United States, it was 78. Because of COVID, it's already back down a year and a half. It's now like 76 and a half. For men, it's around 75, 76. I'm 77. The Bible talks about 70. I'm living in the bonus years. I don't need to raise funds because I live simply in a very nice little house here with my Filipino family. My wife is from the lower edge of the society. Today she told me, Daddy, I can live without money because we own pigs. She's got 4 pregnant pigs and she can sell them. And we got 5 piglets. There's a little sari store that sells snack foods. I live off of my Social Security. If anybody ever wants to contribute money, I do need a car because we're already 22 years into the car that's falling apart outside. But I'm breaking down the images of what a rich American is. This is what allows me to have a sense of comfort as I move into the poorest communities here in the Philippines. As we talk about urban community development, which is the PhD program, Transformational Development, that I lead. We have students from all over the world studying with us. They don't look at me as being an outsider with a rich padding of finances. They see me married to a Filipino family with 3 children, 13-year-old stepchildren, 11-year-old, 9-year-old, that I'm trying to create to be God's leaders in the future. They see the simplicity of my life. And by the way, what's the universal language in the world? I used to think it was music. Well, it's not music anymore. I find music very divisive. My kids put on music. I said, shut up. Turn it off. I hate it. That's not music. Then I used to think it was, the computer symbols. Well, a great many people don't have access even to computers. What it is the language of suffering. That is the universal language. That's the language that Jesus spoke to us in his own being. It's the language that I have experienced in my life. But rather than suffering, I don't focus on the suffering. I focus on the healing that God and the provisions that God gives me to rebound like the Super Bowl. It bounces up as high as it goes down. And when I look at the characters in the New Testament that are a witness, they are the ones that allowed that ball to bounce back up again. And so that's kind of my witness.
That's very, very deep, and it's definitely something that I will be thinking about a lot. So a lot of what you're conveying to me is coming from a lifetime of commitment to God, and say we were talking to someone who is brand new to faith and wants to follow in an obedient way, what would you tell them to encourage them to, because I'll take that question back a little bit. To preface this question, there are a lot of people who think mission work is always just getting on a flight, going to Africa for a month, coming back home, and then that's it. You went on your mission. Check that off the list. But when we were talking before, we were talking about what you call divine interactions, and how that, in a way, is like mission work in the sense that they're available all the time, everywhere on the planet, but because of so many people's being worried about interacting with strangers, those divine opportunities may not be coming when they could be. So what would you say to someone who is new to faith about how to not miss those divine interactions, and how to follow in God's path, and how God's mission for us isn't always and actually usually not what is presented to us as in like, oh, you want to go on a mission, here's how to do it, and there's like no one way. So that's a lot of questions, but
well, let me just reach over here. My latest book is called Divine Encounters. In all of my classes, there's a phrase that I use. I think somewhere I saw a poster many years ago, and it attributed to St. Augustine. Every meeting is a divine encounter. There's another poster I saw. I don't know where the translation was or what it was, but it also was attributed to St. Augustine. Every meeting is an exchange of gifts. I put those two meanings together, and it's become my theme of mission. Every meeting is a divine encounter. Every meeting is an exchange of gifts. And so this particular book is 108 stories that I tell, where I have a very definite sense that there's something more than just a transaction. Most of our relationships in North America are seen as transactional. That is, I scratch your back, you scratch my back. I believe what's missing is transformational relationships. That is something about me rubbing up against you transforms you and transforms me. And that we both become better people, more Christianly, more God-inspired people along the way. And it does not mean that I have to change their titles. I'm not necessarily seeking to change their religious allegiance. I allow the Holy Spirit to do that. But there is a divine encounter. And my life, and by the way, I've written another dozen stories since this was published 2 months ago. I might have a second edition because I'm looking through my life over the 77 years, and I just see again and again and again where God has put somebody in relationship with me, like the story about Angela, for instance, that has enriched me and hopefully enriched them, and that we've been gifts to each other, transformative to each other. And so I don't look at people for what they can give to me or what I can get from them. I look at people as being a relationship not of two people, but of three people, with the presence of Jesus in the middle of that relationship. He's brought them into my life for a reason. And sometimes it doesn't work. There are, yes, transactional relationships in my life, but I tried to move them in the direction of transformational relationships and see the opportunities time and time again. Just an illustration, I was flying down to South America, and I was on the aisle seat, and there was an Asian-looking fellow on the window seat, nobody between us. I had a book by one of the professors at Fuller Theological Seminary that I was reading. And he happened to look across, and the title stirred his interest. And so he asked me about it. And I started talking. Turns out he was Peruvian Japanese. In the course of the conversation, I learned that when it became time for him to go to the United States to study at UCLA, he was an immigrant to the United States. He married another Japanese Peruvian. He had 2 daughters. He owned 7 different businesses. And then he shared with me, I need whatever it is you're talking about, whatever it is inside that thing. I said, why do you say that? He said, because, frankly, I'm returning home after many years, a broken man. My wife wants to divorce me. I'm an alcoholic. The businesses are falling apart. And then he confessed that he was thinking suicide. And I just thought, here is an opportunity for divine encounter. And just as easy as anything, I was able to lead him to Jesus Christ. And we prayed together on the phone. And after he got off, he says, I'm a completely different person when I walked through this plane. God sent you to me. We parted because he had to go through, of course, the Peruvian immigration line. Immigration line. I can see in the far end him waving to me. I've not been able to connect with him since. I don't know what has transpired, but I continue to pray for this gentleman. But I could have gone to sleep on the plane, could have ignored his question. But there's something about this philosophy of every meeting is divine, every meeting is an exchange of gifts, that impels me to open myself up. You asked the question, what about people getting on planes and flying to Africa? I say, look, who's on the plane next to you? Can you have a conversation with that person? Does that person have needs? And can they speak to your needs along the way? Or I say, have you ever thought about knocking on the door of the Muslim neighborhood store in America? Just say, I want to get acquainted. I want to welcome you into this community. Maybe you got some tips as to where some good Middle Eastern food is from. By the way, when you ask people to do a particular kind of deed for you, it builds relationship. Jesus asked this Samaritan woman, can you give me some water? I found that one of the ways in which you build relationships is to have a very simple request that the other person feels good in responding to you. And then that begins to open up the relationship. And so I think the idea that somehow God's going to use me way over there, but it's never occurred to me that between here and there, or even right here, is where I can put myself at risk, where I can open myself up and see the divine impact, the exchange of gifts that God wants to work on.
That's amazing. And yeah, just to kind of illustrate this thing, I think God's putting this in my heart now, so it's important to share. There's a perception that people who, or many people, it doesn't matter if they're new to faith, but many of the people who have this perception are people who maybe new to God. This perception that you put on your Sunday best, and that's when you're on your best behavior, is when you come to church and you spend your time with the Lord, then you go home, take off your Sunday best, and go back to maybe bad habits, or I don't want to say bad habits, but something you wouldn't do in church. And two things there. One is church is just a building. Church is not just a building. The church is a building, but God's church is the world, is what I meant to say. So I'll just say it again so I can edit out the bad part. That the place you go to is a building, but God's church is the whole world. And especially if you are outwardly expressing yourself and maybe wear a cross on your neck or show something as to where you are telling the world that you are a Christian, every interaction you have becomes, representative of God. And maybe, you were grumpy one day and you weren't happy with the coffee order you got and you complained about it or said something rude or something. That is a potential divine interaction that is now an interaction that was tarnished by our lizard brain thinking of selfishness and our constant life we live of trying to be better people, and our constant desire to resort to what's in our minds, not what God is putting in our hearts. And a lot of churches nowadays are talking about becoming a full-time Christian, or how to be a Christian more often than Sunday. And number one is be always obedient to God, and your countless experience of divine interactions, and how you share all of those interactions very outwardly, and how you emphasize it's in your walk, not in like today, or God put it in my heart to go overseas on a serving trip. So check it off the box. I'm done. On to the next thing. No, it's always happening. And I guess the last question here, unless you want to take it further, but what would you tell someone new to faith? What would you tell someone as to how to be obedient and how to seek those divine interactions, aside from what you've already covered, which is go to people to meet people regardless of their faith background. How does someone live faithfully and obey God in His ways, and how can that take that on our divine paths? And that's just my question. There's someone specifically for someone new to faith who maybe was baptized yesterday or something like, or has lots of questions, asking a question like that. What are your thoughts?
One is, you suggested that there are two different churches. There's the church gathered, and there's the church scattered. The church gathered is what happens on a Sunday morning. And part of my concern is that church gathered ought to prepare us for being the church scattered. Unfortunately, a lot of churches, they celebrate, they enjoy their time together, but there's very little instruction as to how to live life in the secular world. A Christian does not see the divide between the secular and the sacred. All things are sacred. Go ye into all the world. Go ye into all the world. That's not just go find people. That's talking about the systems of the world, the institutions of the world, the ecology of the world. We are to be good news to every single aspect of this world that God has created. So that it explodes the agenda. I'm not here primarily just to save souls from sin and from hell. In fact, I've written up a little article in which I talk about 50 different ways in which we can see in Scripture that God has saved us from darkness to light. God has saved us from disbelief to faith. God has saved us from sickness to health. God has saved us from meaninglessness to meaning. And so I've got 50 of these kinds of things. And if you're talking to people, you'll begin to hear from them the before issues in their lives, the fracturing of their lives, rather than the wholeness of their lives. I don't need theological language to start talking to people. The second comment that I'd make is, I don't reveal myself as a Christian up front. The word Christian comes with a lot of baggage these days. And as soon as I say I'm a Christian, a lot of people think politically. And there's a lot of offense to that. I want them to see me as a whole person. I want them to see me as a healthy person. I want them to see me as a mysterious person. What is it that's driving Fletcher Tink that seems so different than what other people feel and experience? It seems like he's always upbeat. It seems like he's always encouraging and so forth. It's when you move into that zone and people begin to see you, then they begin to ask questions about your motivation. And I don't say I'm a Christian. I say just simply I'm a follower of Jesus Christ. Jesus said to me, come follow me, and I'm following him, and I don't know where he's taking me. And but he's taken me through valleys, he's taken me through high points, he's taken me through death, he's taken me through glorious moments. And then I can start sharing some of this story. And people don't turn you off. If I say I belong to such and such a church, or I am a Christian, or I have these kinds of rules and regulations in my life, they close down. That's not my goal. I'm not here to make Christians. I'm here to find followers of Jesus. And there's a big difference in it. And so, yeah, what do I say to the new Christian? Look, let Christ breathe his life through you to others. Let Christ breathe his life through you to others. Let me just share a little personal illustration. I went to the States in October. I was having eye problems. I discovered that I have glaucoma and I have cataracts. But when I study what these things are, cataract means that the center part of your eye can't see. Glaucoma means the peripheral part of your eye can't see. I believe that God wants to create healing of our eyes. He wants to give us a cataract operation so we can see what is right in front of us, what God has dumped in front of us, so that we can be a Christ-like person to that person, so we can see the divine encounter. But he also, I think there's kind of a Christian glaucoma. There's no periphery. We're so American, we're so focused on our needs and our politics and our world that we fail to read and understand what's going on the peripheries of life. And so we need healing in both of those things. And so I take medication twice a day for glaucoma so that I can retain my peripheral vision. I need to be reading scripture, praying to the Lord is my medication for my spiritual glaucoma. I need to be reading the newspapers. I need to be listening on the news. So that when the Taal volcano, which is 15 kilometers away from here, explodes and our family has to flee, that there are people in America that say, hey, look, what can we do to help? That's the peripheral vision. Okay? And so I've been able to work with Singapore Red Cross to provide construction supplies for homes in the area that have been damaged because of the volcanic eruption. Another organization has provided some material for COVID patients. My pastor's 6-year-old son died of COVID last week. It's a horrible tragedy. His mother died 6 months ago. I was able to raise $2,500 on GoFundMe to help pay for the medical costs in the last week. And it's people in America and China and the Philippines and Canada who have peripheral vision enough to get on GoFundMe, send some funds out to help this poor family that's struggling. So we need cataract surgery. We need peripheral medication to help us to see the larger.
What would you say would be the sufficient medicine for our own cataracts that we tend to develop within our own faith? For example, that you were evacuated due to that volcano that happened near your town that had severe damage in your area, but people in the United States, it's like 10 seconds on the news or something. In that same vein, COVID internationally, it's causing mass starvation because of the lockdowns and everything that's been going on. But people only tend to focus on what's going on near me. And likewise, to another point you were saying earlier, like our own neighbors could need help, and we aren't even paying attention to them. So many of us aren't, at least. So I think bare minimum is like a relationship with God and being obedient to his ways. And when I say that, I don't mean like check off a box and half an hour in the morning and be done and just like spend as much time as possible with God. But what else would you say we should add to that prescription in our lives and in our faith and our walk to help remove these cataracts that are preventing our own lack of perception of things going on around us?
Yeah, I would say have an accountability group. 3 or 4 people around you who know who you are and can be absolutely, utterly honest with you. And meet with them periodically, pray with them periodically, and then just disclose where you are in your own life and let them help buoy you up, raise you up when you're down, and knock you down when you're up. I think you need both. The second thing is find a really good non-Christian to critique you. Somebody who cares for you, and I've got several people like who have been burned by Christianity and they have no interest in Christianity, but they still care for what I do. They care for me. And they are absolutely honest with me. And when they feel like I'm putting on a poise or I'm somehow, putting it out there for the public, they'll nail me on it. One of the problems is Christians have a real difficulty being honest with fellow Christians. We pat each other on the back. That's why I need a non-Christian who feels no need to pat me on the back in my Christianity and can lay it out and nail me. I need that.
That's beautiful, and actually I completely 100% agree with every statement you just made. Honesty with ourselves and with each other and our friends, whether they be Christian or not, is, in my opinion, one of the most important things we can have in our lives. And accountability, extremely important. And I agree that one of the best ways to have that is have people around you where you can be truly honest with, and where they can be truly honest with you. because I think one of the most dangerous things to everybody's lives is our own ego, as to where when we think we can do no wrong, that's when we do the most wrong.
Yeah.
I think God is the way out of that, and the prescription is there, and I'm so happy we're able to get this on video. So, because everything you said is like, man, I wish I were eloquent enough to say that. I'm so grateful. Before we wrap up here, is there anything, I know there's a lot of territory in your life, and we definitely have been through a very deep conversation, but is there anything that you wanted to share that we weren't able to address in this interview?
Well, offhand, the gospel is more relevant now than it's ever been before. The world is hurting. The world is falling apart. What we realize maybe more clearly than we've ever seen before. Look at Britain, look at Canada, look at the United States, look at China. Human beings do not have the capacity to solve their own problems. Our governments are a mess. And anybody who promises is a liar. It's got to start at the grassroots. What's needed is an army of fully committed young people who will not compromise on anything other than their love for Jesus. Maybe I said that wrong. Not compromise on anything, especially their love for Jesus. Okay? They'll maintain their integrity, because when you go through hard times and you've maintained your integrity, you have that tether you hang on to between yourself and God, even if nobody else understands it. And that'll hold you in the long run. But we need an army of people who see the world not in black and white, who see the world in all of its nuances, shapes, and configurations, who appreciate, by the way, the value of cultures. Somebody said that 95% of every culture is either neutral or it's good. So we don't attack 50% of a culture, but we are able to see 5% of the culture which perhaps needs transformation. And we have the words and the wisdom to try to address that 5% with better alternatives in Christ. And so we need an army. And I am in a position where I have students from all over the world that are part of that army. And I'm fully blessed at this stage of my life to feel like they are impacting my life as I impact their lives. And that for me is the supreme blessing. By the way, you mentioned earlier, not in this conversation, but Ray Bakke. Ray Bakke has been my mentor. His name is spelled Bakke. 3 brothers that came out of rural Washington State up near the Canadian border. One of them became a businessman and a billionaire. He's been able to finance some of the work that I've done through theology of work. And I've given lectures in 25 different countries on theology of work, because the new army is not going to be pastors that go through seminary. The new army is going to be lay leaders who see their workplace as the primary expression of their worship experience. And so I have the joy of teaching, and Dennis Bakke has provided most of the funds through Mustard Seed Foundation. Ray Bakke is kind of the guru of urban ministries in Chicago and all around the world. And 5 days ago, he passed away at age 84. I would encourage people to see his Christmas sermon, which he preached on December Christmas this past year, his last sermon. You can find it on YouTube. An amazing sermon. The man is an encyclopedia of knowledge. But I honor him this day because part of who I am has been deeply influenced on my relationship with Dr. Ray Bakke. And so Saturday is his memorial. I thank God that I've been surrounded with people like Ray and Dennis, Lowell Bakke, the third brother. These are people who have been gifts to me and helped me to be accountable to the message that I read.
I wanted to ask before we conclude, do you have any contact information you wanted to share to our audience so they can perhaps give you some support or contact you if they need?
Well, my email address is FletchT, FletchT, at AOL.com. So America Online still exists. And it's better because I'm still a member of AOL.
You've got mail.
So, yes, I'm on Facebook. And if somebody sends me a note that they have seen this presentation, I will accept you as a friend. Hundreds of people who want to be my friends, but I'm a skeptic. I only admit people that I know really have a friendship relationship with, because I'm beginning to max out on them. Yeah. So, yeah, and on Facebook, I'm the only Fletcher Tink in the world. By the way, the name Fletcher comes from my grandfather, who gave my dad the name Fletcher, named after John Fletcher, who was the sidekick of John Wesley, who was always considered to be the apostle of law. And so I bear that name on me. So.
Wonderful. That information it will also be in the description below. So if you missed it when Fletcher here was sharing, you can go to the link. That being said, this is a very sad moment for me because I've had such a wonderful conversation with you, Fletcher. I greatly appreciate the experience. And
can I add just one other thing?
Absolutely. Yeah, sure.
And that is, if anybody has master's degrees and is interested in studying with us, we're doing everything on Zoom right now. The cost of the PhD program is under $5,000, which is far cheaper than any place in the world. The quality of our teaching, I think, is superior to any place. We've got 3 PhD programs. One is in holistic child development, which was the premier program in the world. The second is transformational learning, which is kind of the educational degree, PhD. And the one I direct is the PhD in transformational development. And the way in which you can contact us is through www.APNTS, representing Asia Pacific Management Theological Seminary, .edu.ph for the Philippines. You've got to put PH on it. And so if you have any interest in inquiring at the PhD level, or any of the programs, we've got a number of master's programs, but my direct connection is in the PhD program. We offer seminars, 2-week seminars, 4 hours a day for 2 weeks. Do so in January, February, March, and then May, June, July. And you have to have 45 units and a major dissertation to be able to receive a PhD.
And once again, that was the Asia Pacific Nazarene Theological Seminary. And again, if you missed that link, you can catch it in the description in the video below. Sad to say, this concludes our interview. Fletcher, thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us, and we greatly appreciate your presence.
Okay. God bless you, and may this be useful to you.
Oh, I'm sure it will be. It was absolutely useful for me, and I'm certain it's going to be useful to maybe hundreds or thousands or maybe even millions of people. I will pray for that. Thank you, everyone. That was the Mission Enlightenment Project. Again, this was Fletcher Tink, and we will see you guys on the next one.